Hey, everybody, welcome back to Pro AV Today. I'm your host, Ben Thomas. Today's discussion is one that I've kind of been putting off for a little bit, and that's because the idea of touch display, gesture display, is one that hasn't always been the easiest to have in the industry because it's moved from even 5 to 10 years ago being this nice to have kind of cool, flashy technology to now really an essential technology, especially when you start to look at verticals like sports betting, interactive technology, and human computer interactions, things like that. It's a technology really that is essential in many of our installations today, and really wanted to kind of hash out the conversation that we needed to have. And I said, look, there's one guy that I got to get on the show to talk about that, and that's John Lamb from Elo Touch. John, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Look, I hinted at it a little bit in the intro, John, but I think we'd be remiss as a community to pretend like 5, 10, probably more 10 years ago, touch technology was plagued by things like overuse, unpredictable technology, these weird failures and things like that. But even in the last 5 years, we're seeing it evolve into this essential technology. Break it down for me. Where are we in the life cycle of touch and gesture displays?
From a standpoint, it depends on how you want to look at that question. But if you look at it from a standpoint of how broad is the usage, I would say we're still only about the 1/3 point really on where I think that will be. And I say that because, you are right. There was a lot of differences, 5, 10 years ago. If you tried to put out a kiosk or a self-contained thing, it really, you might have been plagued by things like you couldn't update it. They didn't have the live connection. When you think of now to things like, what they call Internet of Things, every device ultimately can get a connection now. And in doing so, you can basically make these things really broad in their deployment and also make sure that that experience is updatable, make sure that it's always on live, and that you're actually doing what you want with it.
Absolutely. Look, and a lot of that has been driven by end user and buyer demands, right? Whether that's in the sports betting industry, like I talked about, where you just need scale and you need something to work for a long, long time, or in settings like education, where a teacher may need a specific use case. What are some of the end user demands and maybe some of the trends that you're seeing right now that are informing some of that technology?
Well, I think end users are really trying to do a lot of stuff themselves. There is a desire to just do self whatever that next thing is, right? Self order, self checkout, self, the buy online, pick up in store, and being able to do that with a kiosk or with a locker. You'll notice that when you see the lockers now, they have touchscreens and interactive devices built into them. So I think one of the massive trends you will see here coming up, because we see it right now, we're a really weird barometer for what is going to go on in the future, because we see this stuff as people are developing it. We know what people are testing, and we know the rough timelines at which they look to get it out. But one of the things that you're seeing is a lot of integration. Things that, so your average ordinary person may not see them, but it could be the person behind back in the kitchen at your fast food place, who all of a sudden now that is a smart scale, not just a typical scale. And that smart scale has a screen on it, and it's actually guiding them through exactly what they need to do, or reminding them the exact measurement that they need to do to get whatever. And so when you start seeing this, your elevators are starting to have interactive screens built onto them. Obviously, medical devices, things of that nature. Buildings, I mentioned elevators, but buildings themselves are starting to put these things in, wayfinding systems, things of that nature. They're starting to think of these things as they design entire whatever complexes, if you will.
Look, absolutely. And what's cool to see too, and obviously you guys at Elo are doing a fantastic job of this as well, but you're seeing monitors and displays that traditionally might have been used for aesthetic purposes, interactivity, maybe at a museum or something like that, be baked into these Amazon pickup kiosks. You talk about BOPIS. One of the massive conversations happening in retail right now is somebody being able to jump over to a kiosk, pick up their Amazon package or their online order and go, right? But that's not a place that, even 10 years ago we were as an industry, especially from an OEM standpoint. Talk about those partnerships, especially as we expand beyond the traditional four walls of AV.
Yeah, well, we have partners. So our entire business model is built by leveraging partners that are out there, because these partners get close to a very specific function, and they become experts in that function, and we're able to benefit and, build stuff based on what they're asking for, but also let them be the ones to help really work on that integration and make sure that it's going to fit the actual purpose somebody needs. But we have partners from everything from complementary hardware partners, complementary software partners, and then even just into people that really would be business partners from a standpoint. They are going to work with the integrators to actually put our screens, from a very open standpoint, not something an average person would ever buy, but put those inside of a product.
Well, look, and what's interesting about that too is that channel looks totally different, right? Instead of the manufacturer, dealer, integrator, installer, end user partnership, you're now kind of taking the end around almost and working with other organizations and working even directly in some cases with integrators for custom projects. But one of the things that we've seen as an industry is that as we expand into areas like a sports betting, right, is we are actually kind of we're bound by what's happening in that industry, right? Sports betting, I think, is a perfect example, right? The legalization of sports betting is one of the biggest opportunities yet biggest challenges of our industry, right? Because there's piecemeal regulations. There are things that you have to know as a manufacturer that have to be flexible. Talk about, as we expand into some of these industries, what are people having to have conversations about, whether it's regulations and installation techniques? What are some of the challenges that you're finding?
Well, you're entirely right. I think that when you deal with certain things that are regulated, and you will see a lot of interactive stuff in these cannabis shops, very heavily regulated and regulated by the state, sometimes even down to a county level. Same thing with sports betting is another one of those where it is regulated, at the state level. I believe it's only one state right now. It might be a couple other. There's several that actually have bills on the books to try and hopefully allow sports betting as well. But to where they can actually do it in things like a retail shop or in a, you go down to your local, bar and grill and you're watching the game, you could literally walk over to a kiosk and just put down a bet. And I do think you're going to see a lot of that coming. I've seen a fantastic deployment at actually a pro sports stadium, which I think is think about the brilliance there. You're going to a game, you already know what you're sort of in for on this. You're super excited and pumped. You're already kind of, probably jaw jacking a little bit there with your friends that you're with, and you can go over there and literally just place a bet right then and there. That's super cool to me. And I think what you're going to see is a lot of similarity, if you will, to how the lottery deployment kind of played out, right? And it started where it's like one state and here's the benefits and whatever. But now, we have lotteries that are actually connected state to state now, like things like the Powerball, right? So I think that you're going to see that, and this is a very growing segment of the industry.
Well, look, I'm crossing my fingers still. We're down here in Dallas, but I'm hoping Oklahoma will legalize some sports betting because, look, these online sports books can't cut it. So I look forward to an Elo touchscreen about an hour north from me. But as we talk about the next generation, and I hate to even say next generation, right? Because it's a constant evolution. But we've done a lot with touch technology, gesture technology. What are some of the things, maybe even haptic technology, that are on the roadmap from an end user demand standpoint?
Well, I think some of it is actually, obviously gestures and things of that nature. We have I think one of the interesting ones I remember from a couple of years ago was actually where somebody took an Xbox controller, which has cameras, has sensors, multiple sensors, right? So that you could actually do one of those things where you actually have the person in front of the screen really doing massive gestures. And it was able to actually do that level of interaction, a little virtual reality, and put everything together. And, so you have the touch gestures, you have the interaction, you have the VR, and it was just such a great, wonderful experience for an in-store, customer experience, if you will. I think that stuff is, you're still going to see some very unique deployments like that. But I think you're also going to see where shops can be a lot smarter by really leveraging and understanding how, when you put a simple camera on there, that it's not doing facial recognition and trying to do all that. You're simply just trying to understand the interaction points of how long does somebody dwell on the screen, right? If they're sitting there not engaging, are they watching? What are they watching? When you start putting better intelligence into that, you can actually design that experience even better, so that the next customers that come along can have a better experience.
Well, and what's interesting too, this is getting a little philosophical, I recognize that, but touch screens and touch devices kind of uniquely place the idea of human and computer interaction at the forefront, right? You know, it's interesting as we talk about things like gathering data and even demographic data and user information, things like that. There's always that question of, okay, how do we better build the interactivity between the user and the computer, or the AI and the user, or how do we do better inputs and things like that? And just as a philosophical question, I mean, what do you see the future of the touch and display device as a gateway to that human and computer interaction?
Well, I think AI should play a huge portion of it. I mean, I don't know if you've played around a lot with that Chat GDP, GPT, or whatever whatever it is. I love that thing, but it still requires the input, right? It doesn't read your mind, so there still has to be that level of interaction with that AI. But when you can start seeing what it can do, and really it can cut down the amount of time you're trying to do to accomplish something, right? Here's what I like. Imagine if you went up to a self-order thing, here's what I eat somewhere else, and it told you, great, try these three things, right? I mean, you can have a level of intelligence that can come back at you, even if it's your first time ever in a store or a shop.
Or it could just scan me, see that it looks like I probably like too many cheeseburgers, and then just go ahead and add them to my cart. John, one of the things that I have loved about watching Elo Touch grow as I've been in the AV industry is you guys do an incredible job of servicing what I'll call the Infocom kind of purist community, right? Focusing on the normal dealer, manufacturer, integrator channel, and then selling directly to the installer and user, right? But you've done an incredible job of finding ways to expand into areas like sports betting, areas like education, finding new verticals to help serve as an AV community. One of the conversations that we continue to have as an industry is finding ways to do that. So, what's one piece of advice that you have to, maybe it's a manufacturer, maybe it's an integrator, but what's one piece of advice that you have to somebody who's looking to expand and serve some of these new verticals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, one of the things that makes us successful is that we actually have this modular approach. So our products are designed to actually be, really coupled with something else. So you take it and you might look at our screens anywhere from handheld all the way up to a 65-inch. We have a ton of different screens in there. You can stick on things like I mentioned earlier, a camera, could be a thumbprint reader, could be, a whatever. I mean, you can actually pick and choose, could be a barcode scanner. And by putting these things on, you can create this bespoke experience that somebody wanted. So this allows, because the people who are really going to kind of bring all this outward is a software person who's probably trying to design a software for some new found, intent, if you will. And, it might be something we can't even think about today. But as they try and look at these different pieces, this modularity, saying, okay, well, great. If we mount this one on the wall or put this thing on a stand or do whatever, or build this thing into the wall, here are the pieces that we need to kind of create that. And whatever that experience is. And here's how we think that person's going to come up, interact. Here's how we design the software to take advantage of the fact that we can do all of these different things.
Well, John, look, it's always great to chat with you. I mean, we'll see each other at Infocom. We'll see each other, I'm sure, at a number of different shows as we continue to go through this year. But look, from our listeners, I want to thank you for coming on the show, right? Obviously, it's not always the easiest thing to find ways to expand in these new industries and leverage tools like touch gestures and always find ways to innovate, especially with the pandemic, right? But you guys have done such an incredible job of that. And look, I'll say this transparently, have been an inspiration to a lot of people in the industry because of the success that you've driven. So thank you not only from our listeners here at Pro AV today, but the industry as a whole.
Well, thanks, everybody.
And thank you for tuning in. Be sure to join us next time.